People, right, I was trying to do it from the house from the car, because sometimes that's the quietest place to work. So I'm just going to go into the spare room and see how we get on. Hopefully we should have a better signal. Okay, that's good, that's good. Who lives in a house like this? Okay, people. Okay. Okay, just waiting for Craig to join us.
How's that going now? Can you hear me clearly?
That's better. That's better.
Yeah,
I think the
that's your reception, not mine.
Yes, it was mine, honestly.
Yeah. That ghetto reception.
Not even. I'll tell you something. Every time that big boy of mine goes on PlayStation playing COD, it kills the Wi-Fi signal. I don't know if anybody
that
experiences that.
But yeah, I mean, I can hear everyone. I can hear you clearly now. I think everybody's
Good.
jumping back in. So just give them a couple of seconds and then we'll go straight in, yeah?
Good. Nice, impressive collection of books in the back there, mate.
Boy, this is just part of the collection, you know. This is a new shelf. This is not even my other one. I just picked up a couple new books, you know, to be fair. What did I just pick up the other day? Wasn't you just asking me the other day about ethnography?
Yes.
Yeah, I've got a new one for you.
Visual ethnography. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mo plugged me in on that one. So if Mo's watching, you know.
Yes, big up.
Is that Nia? Who else is here? Couple people. Nadia, Matt, Paul. Nathan's in here.
Yeah.
Phil's in here as well. All right. The family's here. That's the main thing.
Absolutely.
You know, it's mad, you know, like these little moments and you actually realise how much time you'd actually miss people. Like Naomi popped me up the other day and I was like, rah, Naomi, you know. What happened to Naomi? Like,
I know what you mean, man. I've never been showing my face on phone calls so much in my life.
Yeah.
Honestly, like Zoom and FaceTime, it's just a thing right now.
Yeah. I'm sure that next book for you, you know, D. I'm trying to think what's another book. It might be on my next shelf. There's a book I wanted to show you still. It's a game changer.
Okay.
No, it's on my next shelf. Yeah, I'll come back to it at some point. You know what? Yeah, this one. I mean, this will kind of highlight some of the stuff that we're going to be talking about today, to be fair.
Okay.
Criminal identities and consumer culture.
Wow.
Another game changer. So, you know me, love me book them.
Good. So yeah, this ultimately was a check-in with everybody, because as I've spoken to friends and family, Craig, it's been quite challenging. I've you know what I mean, like on the first or second week of homeschooling, I'm hearing of parents saying, no school today, kids. It's teachers training day. You know what I mean? They want a day off because it's hard work. It's hard work. And with the prospect of you know what I mean, kids possibly not going back to school till September, that's 6 months. Do you know what I mean? It's a long time.
Well, they made some announcement this morning, didn't they, where they're talking about kind of like a phased return at the end of May, potentially. I guess my initial thoughts is I don't want them to rush it, and then there's another peak, and then everybody has to go back inside again for a little while. So, as they say, the government follow the scientists, don't they? And whatever the scientists say, the government follow. So But you know, these people, them and them science, that's another discussion for another day. So yeah, yeah,
Honestly.
yeah.
But you see, the thing is, again, with it being with Birmingham proving to be, having so many cases, the chances of our kids returning back to school is probably going to be a little bit further down the line.
Yeah, of course.
Do you know what I
Everybody's
mean?
still at party.
Yeah, I hear that. I hear there's still party and barbecues going on in the ends.
Boy, boy.
Block
Well,
pops
we'll,
and
we'll, we'll get there at some point in the discussion today.
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
I think everybody's in now.
Good.
So I'd have another 5 people join. I think Claire, M, Toya. So yeah. All right then, cool.
So good, really, guys. So you know, I think it's about looking at how, first and foremost, one of the points I want to talk about is like how our children's behaviours have changed in the space of this 4 weeks, because really that's 4 weeks of a different routine, 4 weeks of like being locked down, 4 weeks of no break from them, having them 24/7. You know what? It's not even just that. How have our behaviors changed with our kids on a real?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So how has that impacted us really? Do you know what I mean? So when we're looking at that, it's you know, for some people they've been learning more about their children because they're getting to spend that time with the children and
Yeah.
kind of figure things out, learn what they know, learn what they don't know. Some of them have learned that, boy, actually my child was a bit of a does give a quite a bit of
Yeah.
talking.
Yeah.
Do you know what
They're
I
the
mean?
problem in school.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
They're the
All them
problem.
report to school, it's not just
All them times when you're going up there cussing the teacher, you realize it's your Pinkney that's the problem. So yeah.
exactly. Yeah, it's been quite an awakening for a lot of people. Do you know what I mean? But you know, again, you know, when we think about habits, like I put a post up recently that it takes on average about, you know, 6 weeks to develop a
Yeah.
habit. Do you know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean? And what we really need to do is about thinking about how we choose our habits.
Yeah, yeah,
Do
yeah.
you know
And
what
it's
I mean?
difficult. And I think for a lot of the creatives, it's been a very difficult time. I mean, I've started to get in some bad habits myself. Things like sleep and stuff. Going to bed at like 6 o'clock in the morning. The other day I woke up at like 3 o'clock, and I'm just thinking
What?
this is absolute madness. And then there's other days where I'm looking at my emails, simple emails, and I'm just not responding. So I know I was speaking to somebody else today. It's like their productivity has also disappeared as well. And I think I read a post earlier. I think Nathan Dennis was talking about, you know, reading, writing. But as a person that's dyslexic, difficult. And I know there's a lot of people at home that are kind of, their brains are wired a certain type of way. And it can be a challenge. So
Yeah,
I think for a lot of us that are so used to the up and down, and we're always told to kind of be still, this is a different type of stillness.
yeah.
So, you know, like the luxuries of going to Asda. Listen, I love going Asda, you know, just for a little walk, you know. And the
At
little
midnight,
things that you think that you can't be asked to go to the supermarket, you want to go masked up, gloved up. And I think that these are the things, and I think mental health is a thing that even before we start to talk about young people as a whole, I think mental health and our mental well-being is significant and important. And in this particular climate, we start to see a very big decline in terms of mental health, because the frustration of being in a space for a certain period of time, and I think also the uncertainty. You know, it's not just the uncertainty about what's going to happen in terms of the future, but also about worrying about getting sick. You got people that have got parents that they can't see, or they want to see their parents. There's some people in situations where, you know, they're an essential worker and they have to work, but then there's nobody to look after their kids. You know, so there's loads of different scenarios, and it's not just black and white for every single family. And I think that these are kind of the things that we see in terms of the ripple effect and the aftermath of COVID-19 and beyond. These are the pieces, and I think that as a community and as professionals, we're going to have to pick up. I mean, like in terms of the game, we've had to completely change our way of working. You know, everybody's shifted to online, and I think that's the reason why the first week, if you notice, Zoom was crashing, Microsoft Teams was crashing, Skype was crashing, because everybody's now subscribing to the same thing. And I guess what I didn't want to do in those initial 2 weeks is kind of jump onto what everybody else was doing, because then the authenticity of what we do kind of gets watered down because everybody's doing it. And I get it, we have to do it because we still have to pay our bills, and kind of change to a methodology that enables us to be able to do work. But it's been very challenging, very.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I know for, university students, as myself doing my masters at the moment, I usually spend 2, 3, 4 days a week at the university doing my work. So from a child, I was never able to study as a dyslexic in the family home. But
Yeah,
you know what? I have no choice right now, and it is what
yeah.
it is.
I've
And
asked for an extension for my
yeah, I can believe.
PhD. I can't study at home, bro.
Yeah,
Can't do it. I've had to ask for an extension. So fortunately, some of us are privileged for those type of scenarios. But speaking to a lot of dyslexic and dyspraxic students, and then there's also the case as well. And we're talking about poverty. We're talking about a lot of students that don't have access to the internet, don't have access to a laptop. So it's more
yeah,
than just the studying element. It's also the barriers in which exist in certain households where they don't have. You're talking about your sons using playing a game and the whole of the internet mashup. Imagine if you need to do an online seminar or something like that as well. So it's challenging times for a lot of people. And I think
absolutely.
that when we talk about kind of the nationwide or global impact of COVID-19, I think it's more than just the kind of things that we see projected in the media.
Absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, there's lots of things to consider. But again, I do want to kind of move on to about spending time online.
Mm-hmm.
And what are our children doing with this time online? So you know what? There's this whole thing that's been trending for a while in terms of screen time, how much time our children spend online and everything else. But again, what first and foremost, like you mentioned earlier, there's an expectation that everybody's going to be online. You're going to access your schoolwork online. You do your
Yeah.
shopping, everything online. But when our kids are gone up to their room for their little bit of privacy, what are they watching? What are they doing?
Mm.
Who are they contacting? Do you know what I mean? And I can kind of get it, because yeah, I've joined house party and I've been having some good times catching up with family, but then
Yeah.
so are our kids. But do we know that in house party? The other question, as a parent speaking now, how digitally literate are we as parents? How much
Yeah.
do we know about the apps that our kids are going on? Do you know what I
And I
mean?
think and I think in most cases we don't. And I say that, in a wider sense of we don't, because a lot of issues that I'm coming across in relation to a lot of these social media applications that are supposed to be used for better communication, you and I know that criminal minds are going to use them for other things. So, for example, a
Sure.
perfect example, quite recently I responded to a situation. I won't say too much because it's fresh, but it was a number of shootings that took place in our community. And it's interesting because this kind of, I've been seeing a number of articles from professionals talking about violence has somehow stopped in the lockdown. And I'm not sure what vantage point they're coming from, because if they're working on the front line, they will know that lockdown is a perfect opportunity to engage in certain types of criminal activity. So where probably knife and gun crime may have reduced in some aspects, it still does exist in particular regions. And I
Sure.
think secondly, in terms of criminality, we're seeing more online criminality. So we're seeing fraud, we're seeing people utilizing, banks, credit card scams, Bitcoin in order to make transactions, and we're seeing behaviors in those particular spaces. But going back to my point about applications like TikTok and
Mm,
House Party, House Party in particular, now you've got an application in which people can communicate with multiple people. People can go into groups and have conversations with people that potentially they didn't bring into the group through someone else. And there's been incidents where young people that are from opposing groups in different postcodes are all having arguments on the one particular thread. And then 24 hours later, there's a shooting. And I think these are the types of conversations that's oftentimes unheard, especially if you're not an individual that is, I guess, aware of those types of things that exist within our communities. And it was just fascinating, the fact that when the family member was explaining to me how this particular incident started, it was just crazy just to see how something as simple as house party, you have individuals that will use that for criminal means.
Yeah, yeah. Because you know the whole thing I learned, actually, I'm gonna tell a kind of funny story. So myself and my cousins, we all joined this whole house party thing.
Yeah.
So then my cousin's daughter found out that we was joining house party. She's like, "No, mom, you can't join house party," because they're from London. Yeah. So when they realized that, okay, as if you're chatting, you could jump into that chat.
Yeah.
All right. So you could if your kids are talking on house party, you can see them
Jump in
on
and see what I want. Yeah.
jumping on that chat. So what happened is my cousin's daughter's auntie jumped in. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like, "No way, auntie! Oh my god!" And let's ended the call right there. Do you know what I mean? And for young people, what they tend to do was, when it comes to like mediums and platforms or apps or social media, they choose which ones they choose to engage with adults in.
Of course.
Do you know what I mean? So, you know what? When we talk about like Facebook is a safe bet, nothing really gets posted on Facebook.
But young people are not really using Facebook like that. That's a big people's thing now.
There you go. There you go. And then they might lie you on their Insta.
But then they'll have free Instagram accounts.
There you go. So so then, you know what I mean? And then when they go onto the Snapchat, there's no way on earth they're adding you, because that's where they're most
if they do add you, they'll pull it in a way in which you only can see certain things that they post, because you can put people into categories and groups. So young people are not stupid. You know, they're very smart and they're very technological savvy. And I think as parents, as you've just mentioned, I guess the question is how literate are we of online communication platforms? And I think that this is kind of the thing. And I think ultimately as well, you know, there's this idea about privacy as well. Young people want their privacy, and, you know, to an extent we respect their privacy, but also just making them aware about the dangers in which online platforms potentially can bring. And I think something as simple as, you know, as I said, a house party that's supposed to bring people together in a time of, you know, uncertainty and, communicating with family members across the globe, is being used for other means. And I think it's when we're talking then about adapting different types of youth cultures, this is how we kind of start to see behaviors start to exist. You know, I was speaking to a colleague last week, and she said that she uses house party to engage with her friends from work and people that she hasn't seen. And then she was talking about people jumping in from other cities and guys just disrespecting whoever they see, and then bringing their friends in, and everybody's disrespecting in the chat and then disappearing, because then that becomes a culture that's funny. And it's almost like those copycat behaviors become culture, and then that just seems like the thing to do. Let's go on house party today, and two of us just jump into some random chat and just start disrespecting anybody like that. Now imagine that's your sister, your mother, and someone just comes in and then just starts disrespecting them and then disappears, and nobody doesn't even know who they are, but one person may have added them a couple of days before. And I think these are the kind of things that, whilst this whole lockdown scenario was taking place, you know, people are just fixated on social media platforms. And, you know, let's just address the elephant in the room. At night time, between 8 and 9 o'clock, you know, everybody's or the swarms his page watching Holy Pabati shaking, and this is what's going on. You know, I was speaking to a parent just the other day, and his 12-year-old son had asked him, "Dad, do you know who Swarms is?" You know, and it was funny because his dad actually knew who he was referring to. And I think these are the things now that even at the comforts of your household, you've got your little son, 12 years old, or daughter upstairs thinking, you know what, they're just chilling on their phone, but they're watching Holy online porn, because it was only the other day in which, you know, one of them got banned for 24 hours, for a significant period of time, because of the type of X-rated things that they were seeing. But because of the connections that they have, they was able to contact the CEO of Instagram and reinstate that particular type of account. So, you know, so what you're now starting to see again, when we're talking about cultures, we're now starting to see like all of these challenges. You see when I'm talking about cultures, how things then become patterns of behavior. So now we're starting to see all of these new challenges now, and everybody's doing a challenge now. Yeah, and this is some madness with women using all kind of instruments to put down them throat, and all of these things are now starting to happen. And I think we have to talk about it and address it, because when you look at the videos, as part of my research and my PhD, I always look at the viewership and how many people are watching versus how many people are commenting. And we're talking about 50, 60, 70,000 people globally looking at that, and that's only a small number when we're talking about it from a global picture. But what I'm saying is it's out on the social media platforms and they're trending, and these are the things in which I think as parents are just clearly not aware of what's going on those particular online platforms. And I think the second thing is that we also need to understand the way that algorithms work on social media platforms. So you watch something or observe something once or twice on something like Instagram, every time that you log on, the algorithm tells you that you start to like to watch these particular things, and you'll notice the video content starts to change, the images content start to change. So then every time that you log on, if it's batty shaking that people are watching, it's always going to be batty shaking that you're going to get every time that you log on. And this is not just for a thing of young males, it's also young females. When we're talking about identity, when we're talking about self-esteem, boosting one's self-esteem and understanding one's true self, these are the things and the images that are being projected by so-called celebrities, by role models. So if people are thinking that's the way to be, you know, the young man them are looking, thinking, yo, that's the type of gal that I want. And the young women are also thinking that's the way that I have to be in order to get attention of a young man. And then whilst these two behaviors kind of exist, those that don't participate in those types of behaviors, what do we see? They just kind of get left to the side and feel that they have to engage in these types of behaviors in order to fit in and in order to engage. So when you ask Darren about what is the aftermath, I believe that that's where the work is important. So a lot of you guys that are in here, I know I see Naomi, I see Nadia, I see some of my I see a lot of you people from London. This is the type of work that's going to be important, not just with the young females, but also with the young boys, about identity, about self-esteem, about what's important in terms of looking after oneself. Because if this is the imagery that's ultimately out there, why trying to get a positive relationship in 2020 post COVID-19 is going to be a madness.
It absolutely is. And you know what? For me, it's just a mass objectification and sexualization of women on a grand 100,000 views at a time scale. And, you know, again, like I said, when we're looking at the dynamics of relationships, self-value, self-esteem, again, is that going to be the accepted norm? Is this the new norm? Because a lot of us are trying to we're adjusting to a new normal. Yeah. We're adjusting to a new normal. And is this becoming our children's new normal?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So it brings the question that for me.
And I think I think it just adds to, I guess, a lot of the challenges that we've had. If you think about some of the kind of key conversations that we've been having over the last 10 years post the recession, and David Cameron, when he was in government, you know, we were talking about significant, you know, systemic issues around racism and poverty and austerity, and the impact of austerity on services for children and young people, on mental health services, on housing, on business, on local investment in terms of people having opportunities. And then I think now this little kind of stint of what's going on in terms of the virus, I think just now adds to some of the significant challenges that are ultimately going to be out there. Because in terms of, I think from an economic perspective, there's also people still struggling with that current situation as well. You know, people that have literally just started businesses and stuff. Now, I know even with my situation, I remember leaving UCB, you know, going into starting my own company like you have. In the beginning, it was like, you know what, things are starting to move forward, and then bam, this has just hit us. So I think that these are also the things as well, that's the impact. I've been doing some work in for Norfolk County Council, doing some stuff in Great Yarmouth, and that's one of the poorest places in the country. And we know that, you know, Seaside and Butlins and all of these things are opportunities for people to actually make money certain times throughout the year. So if we're talking about Easter, summer, and all those things are cancelled, you know, you're putting people in really, really dire straits in terms of, you know, how they're going to make some sort of finance, which kind of brings back to the point that I made, if you remember, at the beginning of COVID-19, I made 3 assertions of what my original ultimate concerns were. And one of those concerns were about exploitation and criminal exploitation of our children and young people. And for those that understand, obviously, the whole idea about, the drug trade, that's also going to have an economic impact as well. We're talking about more risky behavior and young people being used in order to, sell a particular type of product. So when I'm working with young people in those particular regions, they're just going missing left, right, and center. And I think that when we're talking about the inner city, it may not be necessarily young people are going missing at such a rapid rate, but what we are starting to see is issues around violence. And I think that these are the key things as well, that in part of the kind of ripple effect of what's taking place, these are the things that's also happening.
Absolutely. Well,
and I think
Craig,
that one of the things that, just to kind of mention, I think Nathan has kind of mentioned the whole idea about stop and search, and how lockdown will impact our communities more. I think that is kind of the conversation that is a historical one as well. You've got to think that when we talk about any aspect of society, if we're talking about this idea and notion that all institutions in the Western Hemisphere are institutionally and structurally racist, I think it's important that we also understand the ripple effect of ultimately how that impacts every single institution and not just criminal justice agencies. So we talk about stop and search. Interestingly enough, the areas of which that people are not staying in their houses are areas in where there's social deprivation and there's issues where there's ultimately poverty. So police will know that communities are not responding and will utilize those particular powers to engage in stop and search, and they will have justification. Why? Yes. Because we have to also be critical about this as well, because there's a lot of ignorance that also exists. We've just been saying that there's still barbecues and parties. So in one way, we're saying, stop and search, and we have to monitor the way that stop and search is being used, which is correct, but then also about how is that being misused. And it's very difficult when we're talking about communities that are unwilling to listen. Listen, when you go to places like Solihull and Four Oaks, it's a ghost town. So we also have to start having internal conversations as well. What we can't do is keep talking about the structure of racism in society, but then not also talking about how we constantly put ourselves in the trap. And my further argument, and not to kind of deter from the conversation that we're having, but one of the things that we don't talk about is our understanding of racism and our understanding of structural racism and how that operates in terms of human behavior. And until we start to have those conversations internally as communities, these are the things what's ultimately going to happen. So I think that when we're talking about stop and search, yes, it's going to be misused even more so because they know that the ignorance exists within the same communities that are not complying to the rules of just staying in your yard. Now, all they're saying, is stay in your yard and you can come out even longer. So when you talk about now, to your earlier point of possibly not going back till September, I totally get why these particular things are ultimately going to happen. And you know what? It's funny because I just literally watched a press conference in Jamaica and a man said, "Panna your yard." And I'm saying, listen, we need to start boss ass. Like what they're doing in India. You get kept outside, you get boss ass. Because I'm sorry, what we can't do, and I'm saying my point again, is keep saying, we're getting abused and by the system and whatnot, but we're still being ignorant. We can't do this. We can't have it both ways. We can't be ignorant and expect the system to respond to us a particular type of way because it makes our jobs much harder. Those activists in the community that want to help and stop injustice against our people, it's very hard when man are still going barbecue. I seen holy people the other day with their Pinkney in the park drinking and chilling as normal, but then they're saying that this is their quarantine clique. How fool, and they're the same people that are posting up 5G this, conspiracy theory this, and you're expecting me to sit in my yard and I'm complying and listening to your foolishness while you are drink in the park. We have to be more critical in our community about these particular types of things. And that's just my little 2 pence around that particular issue.
And you know what? Again, one of the most concerning headlines that came to me was, in the ends where people are not keeping their backside quiet, they're going out a lot. But it seems to be, in terms of Birmingham, that's where the statistics seem to be the highest in terms of COVID-19 diagnosed deaths. So what? Do you know what I mean? When we're talking about Hockley and Lascelles, it's a worry. It's a worry.
Mm.
You know what I mean? But
Listen,
hey,
listen, there was a
maybe
big line the other day on Dudley Road, and everybody I buy food. Now, I'm not saying we mustn't eat food, you know, and I like the food too, but yeah, what? There's a virus outside, and whilst we keep doing these particular types of behaviors, what we're saying as adults to the children is you can do the same thing too, because I'm seeing adults as well. It's not just young people, it's adults. And I think when young people are observing the behaviors of adults, when we're talking about patterns of behavior, like Naomi just said in the group, it's hard to tell them to go home because they don't understand how deep the scenario is. And I think this is where ignorance plays. And I think that maybe it's also about how do we educate our children into understanding these particular types of things. So rather than everybody sitting down and being conspiracy theorists of so-called doctors that sit on YouTube and say the doctors, and none of that's being verified, rather than using the time to sit and explore that, maybe we should probably start to look at some scientific studies for us to understand these particular types of things. And I'm not saying that we all have to do that, but the point that I'm making is we're using ignorance to justify our behaviors. And that same ignorance is what the young people are looking at us and saying, well, why are we going outside if we're all lining up on Dudley Road to get food? It's a fair argument.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Boy. So I was speaking to a colleague earlier on, right? And we was talking about this whole lockdown thing. Now, I must admit, I'm comfy in my house. I am comfy, yeah? Life is good. I can't grumble, but it's not the case for everybody. So when we're looking at, usually school would be that respite.
Yeah.
Yeah. Playing out with their friends is their respite. But now, the only thing that is their respite is online again.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So, again, looking at picking up the pieces where families are under more pressure by now. Yeah. The amount of people that have lost their jobs and they're being furloughed. The pressure is, you know what it's like half term with the kids in the house. They eat you out of house and home.
Yeah,
Do you know what I mean?
No one TikTok every 5 minutes. They're saying there's only 10 TikToks in the freezer and you've nyam 6. So
yes. Go use your school belly. You know what I mean? Honestly. So, you know what I mean? When we're looking at, like, when I say about picking up the pieces of the lockdown, it's really about what are we going to be walking in when our doors when our doors open up again, right? What sort of issues are we potentially facing?
I think going back to mental health, I think that is very key and significant. I think the other issue about domestic violence as well, and it's often something that we don't talk about enough. And, you know, we're talking about not just necessarily the physical aspect of domestic violence, but also the psychological and emotional, you know, both males and females going both ways. You know, I've heard of incidents recently where a woman's thumping up their man in their face and man are just like, boy, because of the kids, I'm just gonna allow the situation. So I think domestic violence, I think ultimately needs to be addressed. And I think it's something that's not spoken about. And I think I said this quite recently in a video, that when we talk about issues of domestic violence, there's kind of this notion that the only people that should talk about it is survivors or individuals that have kind of got through a scenario or situation where they've made it through. And I think it's important that I think us as men talk about domestic violence more. And I think domestic violence, not necessarily in terms of violence from men to women, but also from women to men. It's something that, you know, we don't talk about enough. And I think domestic violence number 2 definitely is something. And I think economics as well, you know, it's an opportunity now for us to start thinking about partner again. You know, start talking about, you know, how do we save? Because one of the good things that I guess I always teach my children and family members is ideas about saving. You know, so we got tins and now we bust the tins open and there's a little change. There's enough to, you know, buy a little food and these kind of things as well. I think it's important that we look at things like that as well. I think the other thing as well is about relationships and how we understand what those relationships are. Because I would say I've been challenged as well. And as I said to you before, some people are happy to be at home. But then there's other individuals that because I'm so up and down, now I'll have to physically be still unless I'm at work. It's kind of like, yo, my mind's just not being occupied. And I guess it's showing not just young people, but adult strategies of maintaining a little bit of sanity, in these particular testing times. And I think there's another thing as well that I think needs to be addressed ultimately is around things around exploitation as well of our children, whether that is sexually or whether that is criminal. I think those things ultimately need to be addressed. But I think some of the systemic things that we need to talk about is not as well as the economy, but we're talking about like racism and xenophobia. We're talking about a blame game culture that exists within a system of white supremacy, that when there's these viruses that ultimately take place, people are getting blamed. You look at places like China, and they're trying to make this kind of suggest this kind of thing that it's coming from people from, the African continent. And we're seeing how racism exists or xenophobia exists in those particular types of places. And then when we talk about the idea about deaths, I think these are the things as well that we need to also make organizations accountable for, because we're talking about, a rise of, I think the percentage was like 35%, something crazy in terms of death of what they call BAME. And, that's including doctors. And one of the things as well is about the care that's not given to people in these particular situations. And I think one of the things we also can learn from this is about our health as Black people, the food that we're eating. And I'm guilty. Me love a burger, me love a steak. But it's these key things in which are impacting our health, that when these kind of calamities come upon the people, it's about how do we respond to that and having strong immune systems. And I think then also when we're talking about accountability, I think it's quite ironic and quite disrespectful and hurtful at the same time that the same people in which were once under this hostile policy of go back home because your time is being spent in this country, it's those same people that we need to help build the NHS and be very supportive within that. And it's interesting because when we talk about then the whitewashing of media, you don't really see them African doctors. You don't really see them people coming from Thailand and all of these different places that are really some of the most significant workers that are really sticking out their neck and sacrificing their lives in the same country, that are telling them that they need to go back home because they don't have their papers. And I think that this is, a reality check. What this has done is showed how important the unseen and unheard are in this particular current context. And we have always been those people that come from those particular communities. And that's why it's irritating that when we understand these particular societal and systemic pressures, many of us, we become so ignorant and we don't comply and we don't engage and we don't hold people accountable. Because as I said, it's going to make our jobs much harder, because when we go to challenge people and the powers that be, we're going to get hit back with, yeah, but you people never listen though. And they can show us examples, and they can show us the picture of us standing up at Dudley Road. And I keep mentioning the food shop because what it is, I'm gonna be honest, I did want some of the food that I seen in the food shop, but I had to hold myself and say, you know what, boy, I'm not gonna drive up there, I'm waiting no line because I could do with a jerk chicken and a dumpling and a little jerk sauce and a one punch. I could have done with that, but that's the discipline that many of us have versus those that don't, unfortunately.
And you know what? I think the next thing I want to kind of touch upon is self-care, because, man, if you watch it online, a lot of people have been stepping. Again, people are having to really adapt their way they're practicing and doing. So when we're looking at self-care, it's I've been doing some reading around self-care, and for me, what I'm learning is that self-care needs to be something that's role modeled and taught to our kids. So how are we practicing self-care? How are we role modeling self-care within the home? How are we doing that? Do you know what I mean? So in a time of so stressful, are we visibly being seen drinking? Are we visibly being seen smoking? How are we seen dealing with stress? Because how we deal with stress is role modeled down to our children. So, you know what I mean? And
I would say again, many of us are guilty of that as well. It's not just necessarily your actions, but also what you say. I'm stressed. I can't do this no more. I'm guilty. I think I've said it a few times. And my kids are like, oh, Dad, you're stressed. They don't understand stress, but I'm just like, yo, I'm stressed because I want to just go outside. So it is definitely something that needs to be role modeled. Because I think that our children definitely are, they're sponges, aren't they? So the way in which they kind of model the way in which they believe that they're going to kind of live their lives or have certain actions. They learn that from us. And I think that that's where, you know, the scary part is when we're talking about households where there's issues around domestic violence, there's issues around child abuse or neglect, because those children don't feel safe at home and they want to go outside. So, you know, there's categories of different types of young people that we're talking about here, because those types of children as well are in those environments and I don't want to be there. You know, we're talking about, you know, mum's got a new boyfriend and is on some trying to play with them at nighttime and all of these kind of crazy things. And these things exist. So it's interesting as well when we talk about essential workers, you know, in terms of some of the work that I'm doing quite recently, you know, you got the NHS, but you've also got a lot of organizations like social services that are struggling right now because their children are in these particular environments. All secure units are openly are closed, or they don't want to bring people in because of the virus, you know, and there's so many issues. Prison estate are going through issues right now. Everybody's on lockdown. You know, criminal justice agencies are being very clear about some of their choices in regards to how they incarcerate certain type of people. So, you know, there's also going to be those families that, you know, despite us having these kind of privileged conversations, are in positions right now thinking, yeah, but, you know, I'm in a situation right now where my partner's domestically violent, or somebody, or I believe that my partner or a family member is abusing my child and I can't speak out. You know, and when we talk about kind of mental health and mental well-being and self-care and the modeling of self-care, you know, what the children observe from those particular types of scenarios. And the easiest thing is sometimes it's the drink. And then there's not only the drinking, it's also these new highs, because people just want to pass the time. You know, people are taking more of these edibles now, weed cakes, weed brownies. And I'm not here to judge and tell people what they shouldn't do, but these are the new patterns of behavior because people are ultimately trying to deal with the time and trying to cope with the time. Now, I'm just a man, I just sit on Netflix for 4 hours, keep falling asleep, keep waking up. But this is what these are the patterns of behaviors and the habits, as you've just mentioned, in which people are adopting to pass that particular type of time. And it's only going to be so long in before people kind of start to react to the frustrations of having to stay in the house. And I think the bigger frustration as well is, I guess, when you're watching the news and you're getting messages from family members that somebody's died, and you're feeling that, you know what, the virus is coming closer and closer and closer to home. I think you know, it presents a series of challenges. So I think for me, mental health, domestic violence, in my opinion, would be the two things that I think that we need to engage with first. And I think as professionals, as societies, for me, the issue around exploitation of our children and young people, I think is something that's also there. And I think economics, I think, is really important as well, because, you know, whilst every big organization is talking about boosting their economy in terms of helping businesses out, what about those families that live on and have been living on the poverty line for a long period of time? I think it's going to be even worse. And I think risky behavior, young people wanting to be involved in county lines, is going to require more than just youth work interventions. You know, we're talking about, it's going to take millions to engage. And I've been saying that. And people like, you know, Raymond Douglas has been talking about this. Dr. Martin Glynn have been saying these types of things for years, that, you know, the 10-year recession that we've been dealing with, that has caused issues around knife crime and a rise of violence within the West Midlands in particular. Now this particular issue around post-COVID-19 puts us in a deeper scenario, because we're not just talking about aspects of violence as it relates to postcode and street violence. We're also talking about violence towards each other. You know, we're talking about domestic violence and other aspects of violence. And I think that, you know, we've got a lot of work to do. There's no one particular tool or way to engage with this issue. And you know me already, you know, stick to your lane, do your lane best. Don't critique somebody else about their lane if you ain't got no flipping portfolio about doing any work in this community. Because, you know, I'm a big person that don't like people that love chat and disrespect people when they're out there and not necessarily on social media every day promoting the work that they do. because there's so many unsung heroes in our community that are really doing this work and not necessarily on social media promoting their work. So I think that if you've got a portfolio of doing that work, continue to do that work. But it also means that as professionals, we're going to have to change up the methodology a little bit. We're going to have to work in conjunction, slightly different to organizations, the way that we've worked before, because we're going to need to get a door in, because the ignorance has now sinked in even more so now. If we've been talking about the ignorance that's just come about only the last 4 weeks, and however long now that this is going to continue, I think it's important that I think those that are watching are thinking about, okay, but what's next? And, you know, those people that talk about, yeah, but we talk about the problem, but don't talk about the solution. You know me already. I always say, but do we even understand what the problem is? Because I argue that most people don't. And are you reading? Are you understanding what the problem is and understanding the levels of the problem? You know, so just say, you know what, the young people need education. It's more than education now. And there's different levels of education now. It's going to require both men and women to engage with men and women in different types of ways, and it's going to be important. So like when I said that even as men, and one of the things I made this promise to Naomi, I think a little bit of a while ago, that I said I'm going to talk about domestic violence a little bit more because we don't see enough, and she presented that to me, and I totally agreed that the men in Birmingham, West Midlands, that are generally the kind of the forebearers of talking about issues around youth violence, you know, we don't talk enough about domestic violence, and I totally agree. And I think that these are the things that we need to now start doing as well, is also pushing ourselves as men and practitioners and individuals in our community that some people look up to as doing the work. I think that we need to also start having conversations about new things. And I think one of the things that I would like to also kind of develop an understanding and engaging with is issues around abuse and paedophilia, because these things in our community we don't talk about. And one of the other things around social media as well, when we're talking about online scandals, you know, many people remember only a couple of months ago, there was an issue around individuals that have come out to be homosexual or whatever, and whatever lifestyle that those individuals choose, the way in which people shame them and humiliate them on social media platforms. You know, what about the individuals that come from households where their mom or their dad have been found out to be homosexual? You understand what I'm saying? So whilst the focus and the highlight is of the individuals that we perceive to be gay or lesbian or whatever, what is the ripple effect of their children? Because they still have to go to school. Those individuals still have to engage in the community whilst people are naming and shaming them. And I think when we talk about kind of the analysis in terms of my work, when we talk about issues around guilt, shame, hurt, and trauma, I think these individuals, these things are really important. So I think ultimately what I'm saying at this point is that we need to probably start doing a little bit more work about the taboo subjects, as opposed to just doing the things that ultimately are just out there in your face, like youth violence. It's easy to talk about young people that are involved in violence, but it's not so easy to talk about people in our community that abuse children, people in our community that sexually abuse children. It's not so easy to talk about that. It's not so easy to talk about this kind of homogenous masculinity that men have to ultimately adapt to. And if you're gay or you're feminine, then ultimately you're in a completely different box. I think it's important that many of us step forward and start to have those conversations, because you're going to have young people that are struggling. You're going to have young people that don't fit the status quo of what people believe they should be. And I think that these are the things that I think moving forward most definitely is something that I think we as a community need to start having those conversations. And just like Liz just popped up and said, we need to have those uncomfortable conversations.
Absolutely. And you know what? So after lockdown, right, the reality is, speaking to a colleague earlier on, we cannot predict really, even if you've highlighted a lot of variables and lots of possible situations of what young people may be facing, right? We cannot predict what we're going to be dealing with. So so one of the things that really popped into mind was about reintegration. Yeah. So imagine you got 2-3 months on lockdown, and people to go back to crowded places. They got to go back to school. I'm speaking to parents. The parents are saying, my child's not getting up till midday. And they're getting up late, and I can't get them up. Then they're not listening and everything else. So when it goes routine and structure, how are we going to do that? Then it's again looking at how they do socialize. Again, you know, catching back again public transport, which so many of us tread now even more so. And and also it's going to be difficult because a lot of us would have done some good work with our young people and our families that we support, but this break has actually caused damage to the relationship, and it's actually undone a lot of the work that we have done. Do you know what I mean? So for me, that's another concern. So really, from what you were saying before, I wanted to really pull up on a point around stay in your lane, but I like to say slay in your lane. Where we accept, let's just slay in that lane, right? Organize and centralize, and ultimately it's about how we work together collaboratively. Now, really, it's gonna have to be about donning argument, donning politics, donning whatever else, but we've got a bigger problem that none of us are Atlas. None of us are.
And you know what? And I think that one of the things, and I think I've said this to Nathan and a couple of people, I think I've said it to Liz a number of times as well, that, the reason why many of us, and I say this with no ego whatsoever, the reason why many of us are so effective at what we do, because we don't attach ourselves to egos. We don't attach ourselves to cliques that push a particular type of ego. We just do the work. So we don't need to promote it in such a way for people to buy into what we're doing, because we just do the work. And what I mean by just doing the work, people recognize that the chatting thing only goes so far. It only goes so far. So those of us that are committed to collaborating in loads of different types of ways, it's about just how do we do that. And I think I'll use Liz as a perfect example. She has a nursery and she uses so many different types of approaches to engage with children and young people in that particular type of setting. And there doesn't need to be no big poster about it. Just do the work. And I think that those of us that just do the work and slay or stay in your lane ultimately have a very good way of finding each other. And that's why I'm never really worried about those that are, people talk about gatekeepers and whatnot, because the science behind all of that is that the people will always call the names of those that they see doing the work. And I think that it's just about now, for those of us that have weaknesses in areas that they don't know about, then it's about aligning with each other. So that I'm not no big parent specialist, but I'll holler at you and say, listen, it's a parent. Does that make sense? Just likewise, where you may have someone, I'm no childhood specialist, but I'll holler at Liz. Does that make sense? And I think that we just need to humble ourselves sometimes and say, you know what? We have both strengths and we both have weaknesses. And with those strengths and weaknesses, how can we come together with those strengths or weaknesses and engage in a way in which we're meeting the needs of our children and young people, and also the families and the communities of which we serve? And simple things. Because you know what? Law of attraction always works, and you're right, we do tend to find ourselves, because real, no real. And it's just been like that since when? Do you know what I mean? From the beginning.
You know what I mean? So you know what? One of my colleagues, right, also mentioned something about whether we need to do almost like a community truce. I really look at how we get upon this ego aside, egos aside, how we really work with this, because this has messed up so much things for us. It's undone a lot of good work. How are we going to do this? Like he says, in terms of like positionality, I am best placed to do what I'm doing. But you know what? There's certain people that are better placed to do that, whether it's geographically, gender, knowledge base, skill set. Do you know what I mean? And these are the things that we need to consider and stop, and you know what I mean, and really work together and show that collaboration. Unfortunately, I don't always demonstrate that.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we can start practicing, and I think it's things that people do already, but I think it's something that we all can practice, is endorse your brother and sister. Endorse somebody that's doing something in another area. Does that make sense? And because I kind of come from the position that I come from, I've been fortunate to have certain types of opportunities. So endorsing someone's never a problem, whereas some people find that quite difficult. And that's not just in this, it's in loads of things, in the music industry, in fashion, in just life. And people don't want to endorse their bedroom. It costs absolutely nothing to reshare, to repost what your bedroom's doing that's positive. But I bet you some sort of foolishness is online. You send it to a whole heap of people at one time. And I think until that mindset changes, when we're talking about a mass scale of people, we won't see changes. But I'm also a believer as well in reality as well. And I think if in every age and every time through history, it's never been the masses of people that's changed. It's always been a certain amount of people. So we can talk about this idea about, yeah, everybody needs to unite and everybody needs to come together. And that's a kind of an idealistic thing. And I always say that, you know, the biggest proverb always that, you know, it takes a village to raise a child. And I'm like, listen, I don't see no village, because a lot of the villagers are raping off our Pinkney. A lot of the villagers are giving our young people drugs for them to sell. A lot of our villagers are doing things that they shouldn't be doing with children and young people. So I'm not with this whole everybody needs to come together, because we know that there's individuals that hit them women behind closed doors and project themselves as these types of individuals. So for me, I'm going to go back to my point again. Those that know the real know the real. And those that are real, that stay real, that continue to be real, connect with other people that real. But the added thing that I'm going to also add is endorse your brother and sister. It costs nothing to share your bedrooms page. It costs nothing to tell a parent, listen, I can't help, you know, in this situation, but I know a man, I know a woman. And if they can't help, then we can't help. We also have to also recognize as well, we can't save everybody.
Yeah.
We can't save everybody, and we have this kind of voyeuristic idea that I want to save everybody through the work that I'm doing. Listen, I chat to young people till me done chat, and them still go and do the foolishness that I'm telling them not to do. But we can't say that we didn't try. And those that we save, and those that don't, then unfortunately we attend their funerals, or we go visit them at the prison, estate, or the mental health institution. But we don't close our doors on them.
No, we don't.
We keep it open, and we learn from them, and we take from them that we can use to kind of inspire and change the mindset of the younger ones, their parents, and the wider community. So I would hope that, in conclusion, that people that are watching this, and it's a weird one, I don't know how this thing works. Are you able to save this video and share it, or is it one of the, I know that the video saves. Pardon?
I'm gonna post it. I'm gonna post it to the story, so all of this should be accessible. So worst case, I'll screen record it and then ping it over.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I'm about to chip off now because I'm hungry. And
yes.
If I don't eat, I'm gonna break some rules and I'm gonna run down the street. And I don't want to run down the street calm. You know, I want nobody cough on me. So that's me. You know, it goes already. But you know what, it goes already. I love everybody. Thanks for the invite always. It's always about productive and conversations, and let's kind of keep this one going, man. All my people that's logged in, I haven't seen you for a while. Link up, man. Well, we can't link up, but virtually link up, and a virtual touch for all of Uno, and I'll chat to you lot soon, yeah? All right, peace, yeah. Keep pushing. Hey, look, the family for me as well, all right?
Look after.
All right, peace.
So yeah, guys, thank you very much for joining us. I'll leave you for today, but look out for the next video, okay, guys? Much appreciated. Look after.